Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Council workshop of Thursday, the 4th of September 2025. In terms of health and safety, if the alarm sounds, please make your way to the nearest emergency exit, and the assembly point is down Devonport Road towards the Strand. Please be aware that this meeting is being live streamed and the video will be publicly available on YouTube. Members, could you please speak clearly into your microphones and only one speaker at a time for clarity. Please make sure your mobile phones are off. I'll pass to Councillor Baker if he's available for opening karakia. Thank you.
Mauri ora i te whare. Ngā mihi mahana kia tātou katoa. Me noi tātou kimihia te pōranga haua te ao kia i o rangi, kia i o whenua, kia ngā mata o te ariki, kia mata nuku, kia mata rangi, kia reira koe tāne te waiora. Ai ngā maunga rū e ngā wā parawhenua he rei uta ki tai ki tangaroa e ko koe ko au ko tāua nei. Whiti ao, whiti ora ara mai te toki haumi e hui e tai ki e.
Right, thank you very much for that. So now I just call for any apologies. Looks like we've got a full complement, so unless there's any further apologies. Any declarations of conflict of interest? No? Okay. Then we will get on to the business, and we are talking fees and charges review. So hand over to the team. Yeah, Christine will introduce.
So yeah, just a very quick introduction. So you recently had a workshop on fees and charges. So you'd made a decision through the last annual plan process that you wanted to do fees and charges review as part of the 26-27 annual plan. You workshopped through a whole series of potential opportunities where you could look where might be the most appropriate areas to focus on, and you gave us some informal direction on that. That is coming to you as a formal report on the 16th of September council meeting. But in the interim, we're moving ahead just to progress some of the work through workshops. So this is the first of a number of sessions that you'll have working through specific areas. So today is focusing on the places and spaces, including the recreation activities and cemeteries. You'll see similar information for all of the other activities as we work through, so you'll get a bit of a background of each of the activity areas for which there's user fees, how those fees are currently set, what the views that we know about in terms of the users and stakeholders are, what might be your broad options and what might be implications of each of those options. So it would be useful at the end of this workshop if you just have any feedback about sort of broadly the type of information that you're getting and whether you're comfortable that you get similar information for the other activity areas, or is there something else that you're looking for, so as we roll the rest of them through to you, you're getting what you need for decision making. So then as we work through, then this will then come back for formal decision making. This is just so you can get the information and start to give some sort of informal guidance about where you'd like it to head to next.
Thank you. Morena Tato. So first of all, Ross is away, so I've got two new wing people with me today. So Phil Bishop-Everett is our Manager for Assets and Environment, and Amy is our Planning Team Lead in Ross's team. So today we're going to cover the sports field, cemeteries and boat ramps. And it's just, we'll take you through our current thinking and options that we think that we would be able to explore moving forward. And just as we go, and at the end, it would be helpful, if possible, just to get some guidance on next steps. And we'll stop it as we go through each of the sections, just to check in about what council would like to see and continue with. So sports fields, through the LTP, we brought in charging for the first time. So during the LTP hearings, we received a lot of submissions, significant feedback from the clubs around what the proposed fees and charges would mean for them, particularly concerns around the affordability and participation and what it would mean for the sustainability of the club. And through that process, as the fees were adopted, there was an undertaking to continue to work with clubs in any future reviews and post-monitoring what it meant for them to be bringing the fees in. So the fees came in this winter. That's the first time we charged. So we gave the first year of the LTP as a grace period for the clubs to get ready for those charges. And at the moment, it's based on a seasonal charge. So that's just an example at the moment. So if a club was to book 2 fields for 3 hours, 3 days a week, it's $4,000 plus GST for that season. And if we wanted to look at, and as we move forward, we start looking at hourly rates. So if, for the purposes of the discussion that we're going to have, the equivalent hourly rate at the moment would be $11.25. Noting that these fees are only for seniors and they're only for training. When we started looking at bringing in the games as well, it made the fees go to a much higher level than what we have originally set them at. The current intention was that by year 3, matches would start to be getting charged for as well as training. So again, just to give clubs time to move up to be able to pay more. Currently, there are 63,000 hours of sports field use booked in our booking system, but we do know that, and especially before we started charging for the seniors, we were seeing a lot of block bookings, so we couldn't actually see what the use was. And then once we started charging for seniors, the hours of use started dropping because they rationalised their bookings. So for the purpose of this conversation, we've assumed that if we were going to charge seniors and juniors, we could probably expect 63,000 to go to about the 50,000, but that really is an assumption. But the information that I'll take you through, we're basing it on 50,000 bookable hours if we're charging juniors and seniors. And the reason I'm labouring that point a little bit is that means that for the amount of time that, so we've got the active reserves and the sports fields are within the active reserves, but the time that they are actually acting as sports fields is only 8% of the year. So the rest of that time they're open space. So they're our dog warders and our people going in and appreciating that open space in their communities. So as we start to think about what those on-chargeable hours are, it's important, we think, just to, in the context of how often they're a sports field versus that intrinsically important open space. So as far as operating budget goes within the active reserves, we have, well, it works out about 2.9 million a year, and that's for our repairs and repairs and maintenance. So, but essentially line marking, mowing, operational based renovations, what we need to do to keep the fields working and having the capacity that we need them to have in our existing field spaces. From the budget this year is projected annual revenue of 115,000 for fees, but again that comes back to assumptions that we made when we set through the LTP on what we didn't know about actual bookable hours. So for this winter, we actually only received 36,000. So on that basis, we could assume that we'll probably see about 70,000 this financial year. If we were achieving the budget, it's 3.9% of the 2.9 million operational costs that we're getting back in through revenue.
So the actual was about 1.2 cents.
Sorry, I've
We'll
skipped
just go back to that, that page. So I'm just, so we take our City Ops takes over management of these fields, is that right?
The maintenance, yes. So within that 2.3 R&M, I think it's 1.8 that, it's about 1.8 that goes to City Ops. So that was what we used to be contracted out. So that's for all the work they do to maintain and keep the fields how they need to be. And then there's additional spend that we hold it back for reactive. So if we have major damage to a turf or a new sports come in that we need to line mark for, or if something happens, so we've got money there that then City Ops go and do the work for us predominantly.
And so I'm just trying to understand what repairs and maintenance is. Like what does that?
Yeah. There'd be items like the Tauranga Athletics track, needs repairs and a sweep, reline marking, cricket wickets.
Oh,
Sorry.
There's items such as Tauranga Domains Athletics track. It'll need repairs, cleaning and line marking. cricket wicket improvements, One Love post event, Ames Games preparation, irrigation repairs, items like that.
Okay, yeah. No, just trying to understand where, so the operational project expense, that's the lawn mowing and line marking, etc.
No, sorry, that 330,000 project expense, that is if we need to do things like repair light fittings, utilities, as well as in there, that 256. So the R&M 2.3 is predominantly the city ops, line marking, mowing.
That's not really repairs and maintenance though, is it?
No, it's just how it's lumped in our
Okay.
budget. So that's, yeah.
Well,
It's repairs as far as
yeah,
renovations and,
Yeah.
you know, if we need to go and verti drain so that the fields are working better and that type of thing.
yeah, I guess it's just trying to figure out what is actually the expense. So you know, like line marking and lawn mowing, absolutely. You know, maintenance should be, you know, when you're upgrading a cricket wicket or things like that, it's sort of, it is part of it, but it's a little bit out, it's, you know, it's not capital, but it's more around that. I think it's just getting a bit more of an understanding of the day-to-day, you know, kind of operating the fields rather than, because the day-to-day operating the field should absolutely, you know, be the stuff we're looking to recover.
Yeah.
It's the, you know, the upgrades and things like that, that's a little bit more specific to.
Yes, so
Yeah.
on that basis, just the day-to-day is about 1.8. So
Okay.
that's what goes to city ops for
Yeah.
their day-to-day operations of.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so just a question on the collecting of the 36,000 or projected 115, where does the cost of collection of that, the systems to run that and the following up on collections, where does that cost sit?
So in my staff time budget within Spaces and Places, so we have a person on our team that does all the bookings, and then the system generates invoicing, and then she follows that all through, and if there's any issue with payment, we use our standard approach.
So does that mean we actually don't make any money at all?
Oh, no, it's
Yes.
not very time consuming. Putting the bookings in is probably the biggest amount of time. So invoicing and that.
And that system that's used though must be a cost?
Yes, sorry, I wouldn't be, if you want that level of information, I need to.
No,
come back
it's
on
just
that. Yeah.
when you've only got 36,000 revenue and you've got a cost of a person
Yeah.
and a system, then you start wondering why we're sitting here deciding what fees to charge if it's not making any revenue.
Yeah, and then the utilities and occupancy expenses, that's just for the fields, or are we talking like Alice Johnson?
So, yep, so that's all of active reserves, so that's the cost of, so we pay rates, electricity, water use,
But is that for the reserves or is it for the buildings as well?
just for the reserves.
Just for the-
Unless we own the building, but then we would on-charge some.
Yeah, well, so that's what I'm asking. So does that include electricity for the Alice Johnson Pavilion?
I'd need to double check that. If it does, it's on-charged anyway though, so it's the
Yeah,
net
but then
value
we
to
need a
us.
revenue line. Like, it's just trying to understand that we've actually got we know what we're talking about, because there's a whole lot of lease costs that aren't recognised here. So is that separately to this?
I'd have to go away and bring back a breakdown for you, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we need to understand that, because we're talking about, you know, 36,000 that we're collecting from sports fields. I just want to make sure that all the costs there are only sports fields. If we're starting to come into buildings, well, then we need a revenue line for what we get from all those leases.
So, sorry, the leasing cost of the building won't be, it's just where we split the on-charging of electricity and utilities as opposed to the cost of the building, but I can put that together.
Yeah, and so we don't get in if you know, Papamoa football use lights, we don't charge anything on for them.
We do charge that, don't we? Yeah, yeah.
So
we do
then,
pass
is that net? These numbers are very unclear. So is this 256 for utilities and occupancy expenses? Is that the net that we pay, or is it that we pay that and then we on-charge some?
So that's the net that we pay. The amount that we on charge, I'd need to come back to you about.
So the net we pay, so if it might be 400 grand and we get 150 back from these sports fields.
I'll come back to you.
Okay.
Sorry, I don't
No,
have
it's
that
fine.
level of detail.
Councillor Taylor.
Just a couple of points. So to Councillor Schooler's point about the system, I presume we'd have to have a booking system regardless of whether we're
That's right.
charging, so that cost is
Yeah.
on us anyway.
Mhm.
And then 36,500, is that what we've invoiced out, or is that what we've actually collected?
That's what we've invoiced out.
Okay, and are we getting good payment, like are the people paying?
Yes, we've done it at the end of the season rather than at the start, but we haven't seen that there's going to be an issue.
Councillor Baker.
Morena, so you touched on post-event and One Love was the example. Do we cover the full cost of returning the land to what it was now? So some of that shared. And that's with any of our big events like AIMS and stuff that's it.
Generally, those kind of generally they're covered as part of the event, but there'll always be, I guess, supplementary items that we have to fix later on that we weren't aware of, extra wear and so on. It's even like the R&M that we talked about before for fields. It can be specific to the use and the weather patterns that we have as well. So if football hammers one area, then it's just not copy and paste. You don't, yeah.
Could I just add to that, to the question? So where is that money showing in regards to that? So if somebody like One Love is using the fields and we're reinstating it and we're charging them, because they're not a sports clubs have, is that sitting in that 36,000 or is that sitting somewhere else? Because that's a cost. I'm assuming that cost is an operating expense. So where's that revenue showing? Is probably my question. Where would we see that?
So there's separate revenue that comes in for events on parks, so that's not captured in this operating budget.
But is the expense captured in this budget?
Only if there's specific things that we need to tidy up after they've done what they need to do to reinstate the land from use.
Well, yeah, it sounds like we need a wide picture of, all the revenue involved in this, all the expenses involved in this, and then try to carve out the parts that relate directly to, running sports. Because we've heard that 8% is only 8% of the time that there's events on these things. So we need to see the overall, and then we can start allocating to where those costs should lie, because there's obviously a rates component. There's a user fees component, but I'm a bit confused as to where this sits. But if One Love is using the field, it's providing a revenue. There might be some expenses to do with that, but that should be part of the overall numbers, because we can't say, we're going to charge everything to our sports when they're actually used for a whole lot of other things and we're creating revenue elsewhere. So I think, yeah.
Yeah, so we can do some more breakdown on that. I guess I was trying to keep it simple, but I've obviously confused it, sorry. So we've said we think at face level it's about 2.9 million to run active reserves based on these things. And within the 2.3 is the 1.8 that's straight R&M with City Ops. So, but we can go away and show a bit of a bigger picture. But as we're working through this, and I've shown some examples of different pricing, it's based on the recovery from 2.9 and the use of the field.
Yeah, no, I can see based on the total cost, but there's a whole lot of other events that should be part of that. So.
Yes, yeah.
So it costs 2.9 for us to run sport in the city.
Yes, at face value, yes.
Okay, so if we took away all sport, it would then cost zero?
Well, no, because some of it is mowing that you'd need to do on that open space
Well, we
anyway.
need to understand how, that's what I'm
Okay. So,
saying.
yeah.
We need to understand what the costs actually are and where they should, where they should lie. Because, what we've heard is, I think some of this is to look after an event, we do some work to get the reserve back up ready for sport. Well, it's not really a sport cost, that's a event cost.
Yeah, we can do some averages of what that looks like. So it's obviously different each season and things as well, but we can
Yeah.
look at how we'd show that.
Okay, we'll keep moving. Sorry, Councillor Currat.
Now, just looking at the figures and the potential upside, what was the logic when the commissioners introduced or had the debate and decided to introduce these, given that the actual net collection is very, very light? Is it more around consistency and keeping the consistent approach compared to other codes?
Yeah, so it was around wanting to introduce charges because other sports are paying, so there was that lack of equity. But what we first went out with was quite a lot higher, and then as a result of that significant feedback we got about what it would mean for sports, we looked at how we could bring it down. So it was kind of a top-down approach in the end, and then we landed on where we had got feedback that the clubs thought that they could actually afford, and then there was the intention to incrementally increase and start charging for matches down the track.
Thanks, Alison. So sitting in our seat and our responsibility, the risk if we say, well, look, this is only at $2 for every rateable property if we just didn't charge, our problem would be the next discussions that we are having with other activities is that, well, and like the boat ramp fee, they were claiming, well, you're picking on us. So if we decided not to increase the fee, and in fact get rid of this small revenue, then it will create problems down the track. So it's probably something that you would advise against in terms of equity.
As far as not having sports field charges.
Yeah.
Given
Given the dollars involved.
I think my view is it makes sense to charge sports fields for a number of reasons. One of which is actually it enables us to manage the fields better because people are booking appropriately, so then we can actually see what the use is going to be and then plan our forward program and capital investment and renovations easier because we can see what use we're actually going to get as opposed to having thousands of hours blocked out and never used. There is the equity conversation. Indoor courts users do pay more. We touched on that a little bit more, but and there does need to be some level of user pays across the facilities. It's just what is the right balance, and it's not necessarily horses for courses because different sports have different models and different amounts that they have to pay to their regional sports organisation and all those other things. So, yeah.
Just one more quick question on that slide. The fact that the clubs have consolidated their bookings, I can probably look at it there two ways, but probably aligns with what you said before, because if it's free, when generally you'll book all over the place, and there's no sort of concern if you don't take up their booking. That's human nature. Is there a flip side? If you're running a business, you're sort of going, reduction in people is not necessarily is a reduction in revenue, but is there a counter to the fact that there's less wear and tear on less use? Because what you said, 70,000, I think we're going to get, which is, 60, 65, 70% of the use. Are we seeing the effect that could have on the cost? Is that something that should be looked at?
As far as if use goes down, then the cost goes down. To a certain extent. As far as that standard day-to-day, it probably wouldn't, because you still need to mow the same amount, and to a certain extent you're still line marking the same amount. It would more be if that if we lost a lot of use, we wouldn't need to be doing as much renovation work at the end of the season, or that building capacity in the fields to make them work harder. But I mean, I'd like to think that the outcome of this wouldn't be that sports drop so much that it means that the cost to run sports field drops dramatically.
My comment just is did you say only 8%? We're only using the fields 8% of the time?
On the assumption that it would drop to 50,000 booked hours, yes.
And it's just, I guess, when we're talking about needing new sports field and I guess if you're only doing sort of 9 till 5 on a Saturday and Sunday and the rest is mostly not used, that's probably about that. But it does put that whole conversation around, hey, we need new sports fields and we need new land to do them, but we're only using 8% of the sports fields we've currently got. So it's just, to me, I'm not sure what I'm doing with that in my head, but it's a low number to be maintaining sports fields if we're only using them 8% of the time. And I don't know, do you have an aim of what that 8%, what you'd like it to be, and what the comparison of indoor courts is?
I guess it's predominantly because those sports are played after school and in the evenings and in the weekends. So, and then when we talk about capacity, it's because at those peak times it's at capacity, but we're not going to see football and rugby and everyone train during the day because it just isn't possible. I mean, some of the social clubs might do, but generally it's after school and in the weekends for training and games. So the only way that we can increase ability for more people to play is to provide more space for that to happen in. But the times that it's not sports fields, it's giving really important other use back to the community. Yeah.
And I just think probably in our messaging, that's actually a good thing to talk about, the fact that you've got sports fields, but dog walkers and runners and other people or people that just like looking on green space.
That's right, it's that intrinsic value.
And I was just really thinking of the story of that rather than what are we, is that too low?
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
So just one really quick one. This is charging for senior sports, so it doesn't account for all the junior sport users. So when they do their block booking, is it just for the senior club and then they book the junior sport time separately?
So at the moment, we're only charging seniors, but one of the things is maybe charge for everything. Yep. So at the moment, they've rationalised the seniors and potentially the juniors are still being block booked, which is why we've made an assumption that at the moment we've got 63,000 booked hours in the system, but I'd assume that it won't stay at 63,000 hours if we started charging for seniors. The same rationalisation would happen.
So the block booking for the junior starts at 3 in the afternoon through to about 5:30, 6, and then the seniors take over.
Some of the juniors do go a bit past.
But I realise that I've done it myself, and then they go through to 8:30. So really, the grounds are used twice a week, fairly extensively in the afternoons, and then the juniors start 8:30 Saturday morning, and so the grounds are full all day Saturday, but we're only charging for the afternoon effectively portion.
No, so on Saturday we're not charging for games
Saturday,
at all. Yeah, at the moment.
So really, when they are full, they are chocker all day.
Yeah.
Yeah, Councillor Baker.
Kia ora anō. Very helpful discussion, guys. Thank you. A couple of questions from me. What's, in your guys' opinion, your guys is terrible English, sorry. In your opinion, is 10% or 20% the optimal cost recovery that kind of balances affordability and sustainability? Which one does that, if either?
So we'll get to that on one of the slides, if that's okay.
We can park that, that's right.
Yeah, so it's sitting there as an example, and I'll give you my view when we get there.
And so just then, my second question is on the options could be around the charging the kids. A lot of what you guys do in this space is just for the common greater good of our people, right? And I acknowledge that. Have we heard back from clubs about whether they want their kids, whether we should charge or not charge kids in particular?
Interestingly, and I'll talk a little bit about the process that we went through when we brought it in. So there was some limited conversation with clubs, but there was a really strong desire to bring in the fees and charges. So then we made sure that we really engaged with as many people as possible and ran workshops and really wanted to draw their attention to what was happening and get feedback. And interestingly, a number of the clubs actually said that they would prefer that we charge juniors as well, so it was spread across the club. And And then the way that it worked, and then following hearings, we went and spent some more time with some key stakeholders, but we'd got to the stage that it needed to be adopted, and that's why we've undertaken to keep working with them going forward. But really what we're hearing is, even if we were charging seniors, only seniors, some clubs would actually spread the cost across the whole club anyway, and to make it fair, it actually should be junior and seniors that are paying for it. But that doesn't mean to say that they want the overall cost to go up. It's just about how it's split through the members.
Do we know from a club perspective, like what this actually means per person? You know, like we're talking. I just think this is very complicated in the fact that, you know, netball, we've come up with a solution where we're saying there's a facility fee per player per year, and you know it just deals with a lot of these issues because it's kind of set. Like I'm just interested, is it $10 per player per year? Is it $100 per player per year?
It depends on the sport. So as we work through, what we've tried to do to keep it simple is that we're proposing the simplest way to charge would be a flat per hour fee as opposed to a seasonal charge, and the clubs had thought that when we were talking to them last time as well, but we haven't broken it down into what each person plays because every club is different, like sport is different. So yeah, you could look at it either way. I guess it depends how much we want to dive into different ways of how we could or couldn't do it.
Because I'm just trying to figure out what we're trying to do. Are we trying to limit the amount of hours that people play, which is what you're going to do with an hourly flat fee? Or are we trying to raise funds, you know, to pay for some of the costs? And I guess it's, you know, is it directly the hours of use, is that directly impacting our operating costs, or is it that, you know, we go out with a blanket system that it's X amount per player per year, and that, you know, gives us I'd just be interested in looking at some other options because.
Well, but I think it also comes back to where council feels is a fair amount, what percentage we're actually wanting to get back towards the cost of running the sports fields, and then however we achieve that is then up for discussion. So the examples that we're giving is if you wanted to achieve 10% of OPEX, this is how you could do it for a flat hourly rate, but then it also could be a per person charge. But then that also, obviously, if you've got a really big club, a club ends up paying an awful lot more. A big club ends up paying an awful lot more than a smaller club does, as opposed to if it's a flat fee per hour, every club pays the same for that space.
Well, every person that plays pays the same. That seems pretty fair to me. You know, like, yes, if you've got 1,000 people, you pay more than someone with 100 people, but that's fair. Like, you're paying the same. Yeah, I'm not sure, but yeah, I don't know. I'd just like to see some other options because what you've said is suddenly you know the hours change and we don't know who's juniors or seniors, or you know, like this seems very complicated. We have no idea how much that costs. Like if we go to a charge per player, we can very easily control you know what. You know, if there's more players, we get more money. If there's less, we get less money. It does generally impact on usage because, you know, more people, more usage. We know that we can set that fee to hopefully not, because we don't want to impact people playing sport. That's not our goal here. But we want the people playing sport to contribute to the maintenance and the upkeep of these facilities. I understand it from, you know, some of our indoor facilities, we do it by the hour, and you know, I can see that makes sense because we're actually trying to also manage demand there, whereas I don't think we're trying to manage demand here as such. Councillor Rolleston.
Thank you, Mayor. Māori sports clubs, I'm thinking about where they fit in here and whether we've done any work around the equity that it's free. The Māori sports clubs will be providing their own fields. Just think Rangatawa or something like that. So they're actually training and using it and not charging. They'll be picking up, I assume, they'll be picking up all their own operating costs. So if we use some of these numbers, we're saying council or is picking up 97% of the cost and 3% is being paid by the users. So I guess my question is have we thought about how this relates, how this is fair to Māori sports clubs, given that they're providing it themselves and we're providing it to others?
So, so for example, at Rangatawa, we actually do the line marking and help towards the maintenance. Judea, we are working with them on how we can get more use out of their number 2 field, and so council is actually contributing to those spaces as well, and then games and things are played around the city at other council spaces. So we have started those discussions about how it works between Māori-owned land and council-owned land, but we are contributing to their
And would that sit in that cost, or is that in a separate, that sits in that cost?
Sits in that cost.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah. If I could just go back to that conversation around whether it's per person or per hour, and I guess those are the options that we'd want to then go and explore with the stakeholders, and that was one of the ones I wanted to wrap up as we move through. The next stage for, if council was wanting, would be to go and talk to some of the user groups about what works for them, but I think to have informed conversations with them, we also need to understand what sort of percentage we're actually wanting to recover, because the fees could be set anywhere. But if we could just, if I just jump through to the slide that starts to just show what it would look like on an hourly rate. So as I mentioned earlier, if it's based on the seasonal charge at the moment, it works out about $11.25 an hour, but we're only charging for seniors. So if, for example, we wanted to say that we were going to achieve 10% of the OPEX, but this is based on that 2.9 million, we'd need to charge $5.80 an hour, and we'd get in the 290,000, or in obviously $11.60 if we were going to do it. Again, this is just showing a sample as if we were charging juniors, seniors, and matches, just to give an idea of how it flows on. And then this is just showing what that would mean for clubs. So if we're starting to charge for everyone at a 10% recovery of that 2.9, we're starting to triple or double what clubs are currently paying. So from what I've heard from the clubs and know what's happening around the country, as soon as we start to increase our fees that much, we're running into people just won't play sport. So
Well, that comes down to, for example, is there 1,000 people playing football? Is that $25 per person, or is it 100 people playing football and it's $250 per person at that 20%? So, like, that's quite significant.
yeah, so this is a sample of one.
So,
one
but we
club.
don't know how many people, so that's actually meaningless. Well, it is, because they're paying 4,000 now. It might be 25,000, but what's that spread over? Well, I don't know whether that's like, is that going to stop? If it's $250 per person, yeah, absolutely, it's going to stop people
Yeah.
playing sport. If it's $25 per person, well, I'm not sure that, you know, like that's not coming out of the club, because that will be on charge to the people.
Most of it, yes, the clubs have flagged that they wouldn't always necessarily pass on all of their fees.
Well, you know, and this goes back, so what are they paying to Bay of Plenty Sport? What are they paying to the national organisation? What are they providing them? Because they can't use these fields without Tauranga City Council providing them. And that's where we have an issue. You know, what are you getting from New Zealand football for your, I don't know, what is it, $40 a year to join up to New Zealand football? What are they providing the club and the player every week? We're providing them sports field, goals, lights, you know, it's got to be, you know, if we're looking equity, and is it the place of our ratepayer to be funding, you know, the people that are choosing to play sport? So we've got to get this balance right, but we've got to get context. And at the moment, we have no context, and I can't make a good decision. I don't even know what 20% is because I don't know what the numbers are. You know, we've got maybe around about 2.9 million, but, you know, I don't know whether that should all be attributed to, you know, we've heard it's 8% of the time that the sports fields are potentially used by sport. You know, so should it just be 8%, or I don't know because I don't have any context. So, yeah, Councillor Taylor.
Sorry, I might be a bit slow, but can you tell me what the difference is between the two tables there?
Sorry, the bottom, sorry, there's a heading missing. The bottom one is training only. So the top one is if we were charging junior, senior training and matches. And then the bottom one would be if we weren't charging for matches. So,
Okay.
yeah,
Thank
just
you.
showing the difference.
Sorry, and a second question, which probably goes back to some of the earlier stuff talked about. What was the rationale for not charging juniors? Like, I presume when we're talking basketball, for example, they would pay to use an indoor court as a junior level, or?
Yeah, it was just a way, I guess, of easing into charging the fees and starting high and then moving down, and how we could make it affordable. And we got to a level that the clubs were saying that they thought they could afford and their club would be able to be sustainable. Yeah. Yeah, we had to start somewhere, and where we first went out for consultation very strongly didn't land with the clubs.
Sorry, just carrying on with the indoor court thing. So do we differentiate between a junior and a senior and what we charge for the indoor courts, just out of interest?
At both venues we do, yeah. Yeah, there's a junior rate and a senior rate.
Is it double?
I think it is about 50% discount for junior, but we can confirm that for you.
And junior is under
16. Well, we do under 16.
under 16?
Yeah.
Thank you.
But, you know, we just heard, again, we heard about an athletics track. Well, I'm sure an athletics track costs more than a sports field. You know, we charge basketball more because an indoor arena costs a hell of a lot more than a sports field. So it's, you know, we've got to break it down to get an idea of what we're actually doing. So, yeah, Councillor Carrat.
Just more along the charging children argument and the consideration that the previous commission obviously put into that issue, and it's around the health and well-being of the children, which is pretty critical. That's our future. And I can understand a concern by the ratepayer in terms of supporting or supporting via their rates to provide sport fields for adults, but I don't think if any ratepayers would oppose a minimal fee to provide a basic entry level for kids at the bottom end to be able to get out there and kick a ball around. I mean, it's really critical stuff. So just having that in mind, of the other councils that do charge for sport fields, how many would charge for children? Have you done a bit of benchmarking around?
We did, but I'd need to dig that back up. Sorry, I am aware that there are a few that don't charge for juniors for that reason, but it does mean that seniors keep paying more and more. We did do some benchmarking. I can bring that back and have more of a comparison about who's charging for juniors or seniors.
It's, when it says that the clubs have had their preference, are we sort of saying that just the management of the club or the administrators of the club, or are we saying that they've gone out to their people and asked everyone, what do they think? Because to me, that you might get a different answer.
It was a mix of both. The submissions that we got in through LTP were from the administrators and from the members, but when we are going out and talking, it's predominantly with the administrators. Yeah.
So you're sort of suggesting it's quite across the board that people say we'd rather charge for juniors as well to keep
for both, yeah, generally what we were hearing from clubs is that they thought that it would be fairer to charge all users within their club. Bearing in mind these conversations were 2 years ago, but that's what we heard then, yeah. So I feel like the next steps are kind of out the window based on this conversation. But so, because we knew we were going to come back in October, so we were thinking that we could go and have some conversations with some of the key user groups just to sort of test where they were sitting on what would be sustainable and whether it's training and matches and all those things. But it sounds like we've got some more work to do to come back in October, or do you want us to start having conversations with user groups? But I guess it comes back to, for us, it would be helpful to know what % of cost recovery council is interested in trying to achieve, but...
I guess my direction is I can't tell you because I don't know the numbers. I don't know how many people we're talking. I don't know what the quantum would be. You know, we could pull a number out of our, out and say, okay, we want 50% recovery, but if that's $500 per person playing sport, then no, I don't want 50% recovery. It's until we get a little bit more idea of that, then it's very hard to talk about any of these things. But principles are, I want some recovery of the cost of running these facilities by the people that use them for structured sport. I want it to remain affordable to everyone to be able to continue to play sport, and we've got to try to strike a way that works. I believe charging per hour, is an administrative, I think there's potentially better ways to do this, and some sort of flat fee or per person facility charge I think would be a simpler way. But maybe go and test that with the clubs. Would you prefer to pay per hour, or would you prefer to pay a flat fee and start to get some where they think is affordable. Netball ended up agreeing to a place where they thought that actually that is reasonable for our players and affordable. And then from an equity perspective, we've got to figure out putting that across. So if an athletics track is more expensive than a sports field, then they pay a slightly higher fee than someone just using a sports field. Like basketball pay more because they're playing in an indoor arena. Netball play a little bit less, they're on outdoor courts. So it's trying to get that equity around what we do, and it's justifiable to everyone that they're contributing, but still affordably. So that's the direction, I guess. And once we see some more numbers, we can come back with some better idea of some of those questions. Yep, Councillor Shula.
Oh, wrong button. Oh, I'm dyslexic. Yeah, okay. I'm here. Just for a bit of my own thinking, I just looked there, I think it's on page 10. So the average fee, circa $40 per hour for indoor sports, and they manage operating cost recovery is around 54%. So, and we've had around here, we've all had talks with basketball and what they pay. So understanding the difference between, I'm real keen to get the difference between the 8% use of the field compared as sports versus free time. I would obviously impact that the indoor facilities, are used more predominantly for, as you say, less for just general community use. But it'd be really good to get just a bit more clarity in terms of the breakdown. So that 40 per hour is per court per hour?
Yes, that's right.
How is it that there's, because it'd be good to get that equity understanding across any sport. You want to start with that base of it's, there's going to be some
That's what we were going to bring back in October, just the
Right.
time frame,
Okay.
and Adam at Bay Venues, who we need to work with, is away this week as well. So we've started that conversation. So this was just a really high-level snapshot of average is $40 an hour, cost recovery is 54%. Just noting that, as opposed to the sports fields, which are only sports fields for a small amount of the time, courts are always courts. So the cost recovery is higher because not all they do, but in essence, they're a court all the time. They don't offer that passive,
Yeah, and that will take some, so is that 8% effectively, does that ultimately come, how many fields have we got? 70 something?
71.
So it is 71, my maths was right then, 365, 71, 24 leaves, okay, that's good. And so that 8%, I suppose the other thing, when we work through those numbers in terms of equity, someone running a dog around on a field versus 30 people running around playing rugby on a field will have a different impact, on the amount of maintenance and that required. So the straight per hour rate there might be some weighting obviously towards the people using it for sports fields, which is primarily being set for, we'd expect maybe a little bit more there rather than just an hour per hour. Obviously it doesn't include 10 o'clock at night till 10 in the morning or something.
And there's also the summer and winter conversation, because obviously the fields take a lot more work in winter than they do in summer. And then also summer fields, their season tends to be impacted more because we have to fix up winter before we start summer sport. And
Councillor Morris.
Thanks, Jed. Some general observations, if I may, Mayor. I know it's important, and I support the principle that everybody pays a fair share. And I do note that we're kind of putting ourselves into contortions like a game of Twister to try and get what's fair and equitable, because it is different, for different people. And I think if you're looking right down at the field user, the last thing we want to do is to discourage children from playing sport, at the end of the day, or even adults in terms of the health benefits. But when we're looking at the quantum, like, the user fees and charges, 3.9% at the moment of OPEX for sports fields, 115,000 a year. If you look at some of the other, what I'd invite colleagues to reflect on as we're having this discussion, some of the other things that council does. And last week we were looking at the digital services, and just one small part of that was hardware replacement over the coming year, which was $1.8 million. And I know of an organisation which is 4 times larger than Tauranga City Council, which spends $200,000 on hardware replacement in a year. That's laptops and what have you, and phones. So it's not an apples with apples comparison, that's for sure. But when we're looking at direct charging for our people, I think we've got to keep some of those bigger spends that council does in context, and whether we're getting value for money there. Because those are some really big levers that we can pull in terms of value for money that will have, an impact on individual children who are playing or people who are exercising. So I just don't want us to lose sight of that. I know that we won't. Yes, I do support we've got to be more fair in terms of user pays, but let's keep that in perspective, I suppose.
Councillor Baker.
The answer to my question might not be the appropriate time to ask, but I am touching on what you spoke about, Mahi. Curious to know, what real value and purpose those big governing bodies have at a local level. Because doing just a real quick Google, the functions that like Sport New Zealand or Rugby New Zealand provide, we could just provide ourselves, and I don't know what material impact removing that burden, if it's possible, from our clubs to take on, would actually have on our kids or adults pursuing these sports as like a professional career.
It's the regional sports organisations that are doing the charging. So, for example,
Sport Bay Plenty.
no, so like YBOP, so for Football Bay of Plenty, so they do all of the administration around the games and tournaments. So the clubs do all their bookings for their training and they manage all that from a club level, but the regional sports organisation governs all of the tournaments and the round robins and who plays where over winter, and then all the points controlling, and then who ends up in the finals and semi-finals. So it's all of that, and then they have their overarching administration body that makes all that work, and so that's what each club pays to keep that regional sports organisation or RSO working. I think there is a broader discussion that needs to happen nationally around in public, so I probably need to be a little bit aware. This is one of my bandwagons, but there are a lot of RSOs doing the same thing, and they are one of the reasons that a lot of cost goes to sport. We are actually only a very, very small amount of what sports pay to be a club. So nationally there needs to be some sort of conversation around RSIOs. Should they be rationalised? What can they do to run things cheaper? But that's not something that we have the ability to drive at this stage. But we do need to be aware of how much those costs also impact the club and the ability for people to play sport.
Is there a way then that we could start small within Tauranga or the Western Bay and harmonise some of those overlapping functions and find ways that some of those... Because, sorry, I'm just going off what you're saying. I don't actually know in detail how these things work, but how maybe there's a way that we can encourage collaboration across RSOs and us, considering we provide such a big...
That's kind of a Sport Bay of Plenty function, okay. And we can certainly start... Well, those conversations are happening, but it's also something that's done at national level around how those sports operate. Yeah. Okay. Cemeteries. Are we ready to go to cemeteries? So in this section, we'll take you through some of the key information about the cemeteries, the context and the current business model that we have, particularly in obviously relation to the fees and charges. And again, just keen for some guidance as we work through that. Cemeteries are relatively complex just in what they are before we even get to the fees and charges. So we currently have 3 cemeteries. So the Mission Cemetery is completely closed and is managed essentially like a park and grounds and open space now. The Avenues cemeteries were originally going to be the main city cemetery, and they were split into denomination cemeteries, which is why they're in different locations through the avenues. And then in the 50s, the council of the time made the decision to subdivide, so to leave the current cemeteries where they were and to make the rest of the cemetery land back into residential, and then from the sale, the proceeds from that sale bought the land at Pies Pa, which is our main cemetery now. So the Avenues cemeteries are only open for second interments, or if a plot has already been reserved for another family member. So the Pies Pa is our most operational cemetery, where we do the cremations, ash burials, casket burials and ashes scattering. Based on current population and trends and forecasting, trends being the move to cremations, small cremations and burials, we think that we've got enough burial space at Pies Pa until 2050. So if we keep going the way that we are and the way that we're managing cemeteries, there's a discussion to be had about future land purchase or what that would look like, or if we manage our cemeteries differently. So under the Act, councils are required to provide a cemetery. We're not required to provide cremations, but as we go through, we'll just show how important the cremations are to the ongoing operational costs of the cemetery. At the moment, the revenue and finance policy requires us to have to be 100% user fees and charges funded. So there's 70 to 100% band, but with no general targeted rates funding. So if in a year that we don't make enough revenue, then any residual cost gets added onto our debt, which increases the problem each year. Annually, we undertake 300 to 1,400 cremations, and that's predicted to go up to 2,100 or 2,700 to 2,700 based on current numbers, and 140 to 170 burials annually, which is also predicted to increase, but 34% of those are second interments. Just to note that Western Bay of Plenty doesn't have a cremator. And nationally, the trends are changing with increasing cremations, and also natural burials is starting to become more popular as well. We're required under the Act also to be able to respond to civil emergencies, so if there is a large amount of deaths in a short period of time. And also just worth noting that the cemeteries also provide more than somewhere just for burials and for people to go and visit their loved ones. We know that people come through and walk their dogs and just actually appreciate it is actually a really beautiful, serene space to go and to be part of.
Sorry, can I just ask, on the non-Pies Pa, are there still charges? So how are they funded? The Tauranga, the Avenues cemeteries, how are they funded? They must still cost something to maintain. Where does that, and that land is owned?
So the question is, do we fund it as part of the?
Yeah.
I'm just thinking, does Andrew's team just give me a second?
Yeah. Sorry.
Kia ora. So all of the cemeteries are funded by the total pool of user fees and charges. The whole activity.
So the cost of maintaining Tauranga is part of the having to get 70 to 100% of the users of Pies Pa.
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
So as mentioned, the current user fees policy, revenue and finance policy requires full self-funding, so limited rate funding, and then that obviously makes the user fees have to increase every year. It is difficult to keep doing that at the level that we need to as per what is currently in the long-term plan. So because we need to do capital improvements to have an appropriate level of cemetery, as well as improving what we currently have, but there's options for that I'll talk you through. Because we need to debt fund within that self-funding policy, the prices just keep going up and up and up, and it's starting to get to the stage that that's just not going to keep being tenable across our community. What we have looked at is what a bare minimum capital program would look like to reduce the operating deficit. It does help, but it doesn't solve the problem, but we can talk you through that a bit as well.
Have we always had this full recovery model, or is that something that's changed in the last?
I'm not sure actually, so at least 10 years. Do you know, Catherine?
So the demand for our cemetery services, which affects operating revenue and our ability to recoup our expenses, is dependent on complex variables outlined in that table, which we actually can't 100% control. So, for example, deaths, we're not in control of that, obviously. And 19.3% of our population is over 65, and those over 65 actually have a higher death rate per annum. Compared to the general population, so it's 7% versus 0.3%. The national average for regions is 16.5% for those over 65. So as a region, we have a higher number of absolute deaths per annum. As our population continues to grow, the absolute number of deaths will grow as well. So as an example, over the last 10 years, the absolute number per year has actually grown by about 30%. And the demand for our services and therefore revenue is also affected by price. So our user fees, which you can see in that table, have increased by 47% for cremations over the last 5 years and 73% for burial plot fees. So there's been substantial movements in those user fees. Just to give you a comparison, most cremation prices around the country sit sort of in that $700 to $800 range, so it was substantially more expensive. And as a consequence, we know that families, even in Tauranga, are going to our neighbours to get their loved ones cremated. And even to add to this, recently we know that a private provider in Hamilton is promoting pick-up and drop-off cremation services for around 30% cheaper than our price. Funeral directors also affect our demand for our services. They are in effect our supply chain, so they 99.6% of our cremations in the last 2 years have actually come through funeral directors, so they're an important piece of our cemetery puzzle.
Rather.
Just going back to that first analysis of the deaths, it'd be helpful, I think, to see, rather than over 65, which is a bit blunt, like to go over 75, like 75 to 85, however you want to divvy it up. But I think that would be interesting to see our death rate when you make projections based on those more fine-tuned analysis, because if we had a higher death rate for the same population age, that would be interesting in and of itself. It'd be probably good to know that. But I think you'll find that it's partly the demographics of older people.
Yeah, for sure. So get into the total deaths as opposed to over 65s. We can see that they've gradually increased over the last 10 years. And so on the blue bars there on this graph, we've got the TCC service deaths through our cemeteries, and the orange bars there, the Tauranga City deaths. So you can definitely see that there's a relationship between the two, that as deaths increase, we generally increase our number of services that our cemeteries have to provide. There's an obvious gap there in 2020 and 2021. So in 2020, obviously the number of people that died in Tauranga decreased because of lockdowns, and then it's gradually started to come back up again. And there's a significant gap between how many people died and how many deaths that TCC serviced, and that was due to a rapid increase in our user fees, so $200 increase in cremations and burials, and then also we actually had a private provider within our area providing cremations. So we had the dual thing there of a price increase and competition. And then that cremator was actually shut down, which, so you can see in 2022, the numbers rebounded as far as the number of people that our cemeteries had to service. We also know that a private provider will be coming back into the market pretty soon to provide cremations, so that competition will re-enter the market.
So, but at the moment, we're actually servicing more than just Tauranga deaths.
Correct. So that's people from Western Bay, for example. Yeah. Yep. If we dig a little bit deeper into, not intended, but you could use it like that, into some price benchmarks. So we'd had a look around New Zealand, and here's some benchmarks from the North Island. We can see that our cremation price, so that's the red bar, is one of the highest in the North Island, and our burial plot fees, based on these comparisons, around fourth highest. Our direct neighbours, to give you some comparisons, Whakatane are 687 versus ours is 979. Hamilton is $695, and Rotorua is as low as $472, so substantially cheaper. What we did is we had a look around all the revenue and finance policies to see actually how is it funded from other councils, just to get some good benchmarks, and found that on average it's a 45% rates contribution in comparison to us, which is 100% user fees. Interestingly, looking at all of those policies as well, we're only one of two councils who recoup 100%. Yeah.
And do we?
we'll get to that.
What if,
Sorry?
which other council,
Blenheim.
okay.
Councillor Taylor.
So, sorry, just carrying on with that conversation about the 45%. So looking at the little graph here, New Plymouth, it's about the same price as us. Are they 100% recovery as well? Like, are the ones that are expensive actually?
Yes, so there's a relationship there for sure.
Yeah. So we probably need to know which of these ones here, like it's an unfair comparison if they're subsidising by up to 45%. It'd be good to know which ones those are, if we can get that breakdown.
Yeah, definitely, we can provide that. So New Plymouth is an example there in that 0 to 10% range of rates contribution. So
just looking at that graph, and we've heard that potentially we're going to run out of land in Pies Pa. So why would we, shouldn't we be increasing our burial plots? Like we're actually quite low, compared to New Plymouth, Hamilton, Auckland, and if you actually break that down, a burial plot is you're paying a price not only to buy that piece of land, but for the maintenance of that cemetery for the next 50 or 100 years. I don't know how long it is until you might put a second interment in there, but don't you have it pretty much for life? So you're buying a piece of land for life and for death, and you're paying for that. The cost of maintaining that park effectively in perpetuity. So, I think. I'd be interested to know how we break that down, because it seems like we're using our cremations to subsidise people getting buried, whereas maybe if we want that behaviour change of actually we want less people buried and more people cremated, we need to look at pricing that comparatively.
Yeah, there's certainly an option there. As an example, Adelaide, I think it is, somewhere in South Australia, they have limited tenure, which I know has been discussed, and their plots that are in perpetuity are around 4 to 5 times more expensive than a limited tenure spot.
Right, any other questions on that right now? Okay.
My only thought would be maybe we don't have the policy that we want to change behaviour on, but our policy is that we actually collect the right amount of cost to pay for the right amount of plot.
Yeah, well, the policy already said 100%, and clearly I don't think it's...
Yeah, but 100% of burial plots and 100% of cremations rather than one subsidising the other.
Yeah.
Rather than suggesting that as a council we want to change behaviour on.
So as far as cremations go, they are obviously a large percent of the revenue, the total revenue that we get in. So 2025, it was 67% of the total revenue brought in through the cemetery. As we've touched on, it significantly reduces the amount of land that are required and is a more affordable option. So on the par of what we were just talking about, having a look at how we can affect that behaviour to encourage more cremations and less burials does answer that question about how much land we have available.
And sorry, just to break that down, so if you got cremated, obviously there's a cost there, and then you wanted to get your ashes buried in the cemetery, like what is the difference between just getting a burial plot and a cremation and burial? Is that?
So you pay separately for the ashes. So the scattering of ashes is $108 and an ashes burial is $142. And then it ranges, and then there's an ashes plot, Catholic and Presbyterian plot are made, and it's $780. So it depends what they want to do with their ashes.
So it's still significantly cheaper than to do that than have a plot. But yeah, I guess we're just trying to get more in the cost recovery from the activities rather than cross-subsidising. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, and obviously much smaller space, and especially if it's just a plaque on the beam as opposed to a space that's continuously kept upkept, yeah. As Amy touched on, we are expecting cremations to drop with the competitor coming back into the market soon. And if our cremation prices keep going up and we've got a additional competitor in the market, our revenue could stand to take a significant drop. And already at the moment, again, as Amy touched on, there is a competitor, a provider in Hamilton that will come and pick up the deceased and do the cremation and bring back to Tauranga for significantly cheaper than what we're doing. So there's a number of factors that are happening now that if we keep putting our prices up and up, will severely limit the amount of cremations that we're putting through.
Yeah, Councillor Crowther.
Yeah, my understanding from one of the local funeral companies' directors is that they're at about 50% of their market at the moment, if you like, out of town. So that's very recent. So I guess have we actually modelled, getting back to sort of the whole purpose, I presume, is to look at where we set the user fees and where we set rates funding, and we've got 100% versus 0%. Like, the market might dictate what happens here. So we might be on I won't quote what I said in regards to public transport, which was a death spiral, but we might be on a downward trajectory in terms of our funding, because we really run the risk of sort of trying to do the right thing and make it sort of user pays, but then end up getting less in than if we had a portion of rates funding. And I guess it'd be helpful to see some modelling around, if it, maybe doing a survey around the funeral directors and actually seeing what the reality is going to be. Because certainly burials, we're talking quite a big margin for Western Bay, I believe. There are people who are being buried in the Western Bay now who would previously have been in Tauranga. Their preference would be Tauranga, and that's 2,400 cheaper. So, I guess it's just whether we look at this collaboratively across the sub-region with not just the councils, but the funeral directors involved in some kind of collaborative approach to sort of see how can we actually, we're not trying to make any money out of this. This is just trying to provide a good public service. And I sort of worry we're kind of, again, not quite sure of all the facts around it. Yeah.
We do talk about that a little bit later on, tying in all those things together. Yeah.
Councillor Taylor.
So you talk about competition coming in, like if somebody applied, put in a resource consent application,
So that's legacy will be coming back.
So that's the previous operator that went down, so they're coming back. So what's the time frame with that?
I was told within the next year.
Yeah, and what was the reason that they collapsed previously?
They breached their resource consent through emissions.
Okay, thank you.
Just a question on once competition comes in. So, by the Act says that we have to obviously provide and the service, and then if someone else is in the market, how does that impact them? So let's just say that they lost their resource consent or something, and a market had said, hey, we've only got to do 200 a year, but there's 400 a year being done in Tauranga, and then the private provider falls over, and we've suddenly got to do 400 a year, but we've only got capacity to do 200. Like, what's our obligations and what's our legal?
We don't have to provide cremations. We only have to provide the cemetery and appropriate service levels within that. We don't have to provide under the Act, but I guess what we're trying to say is that if we want to stay at all sustainable, we need to be able to provide cremations to keep our revenue at a level before we have to dip even more into rate funding.
Councillor Taylor.
This is a bit out there, but have we considered privatising our cremations?
I don't know if we've considered it, would be a strong word, but we have talked about it internally because that's what happens in Kapiti. So the two cemeteries there there's cremators on there that are leased out to the funeral directors, and they do it themselves and just pay a portion to the council. Yeah.
So first of all, to your point, Councillor Crowther, we do know that from the numbers, if we go back to this slide here earlier, with that gap, our cremation revenue actually dropped from 2019 from $500,000 to $340,000. So you can kind of look at potentially what that balance and that modelling could work towards.
That was pre some significant increases in side fees as well, though.
Yeah. So if we look at the operating overview, financial overview, the general operating expenses tend to increase per year. Obviously, there's more cemetery to look after. There's general expenses that increase. And as mentioned, this obviously affects the actual financial model and user fees. The deficits in the last 3 years were for a variety of reasons. So we've got some reasons below there, such as gas increases. As you know, that's been on the news quite a lot recently around the gas prices. They've increased significantly. Due to that increase in demand in 2023, we needed to increase the number of FTEs at the cemetery to cater for the increased number of cremations and burials. So that created the deficit there. And in 2025, we had lower revenue than expected, as well as increasing gas prices. So you can see the overview there. Obviously, the finance expenses increase over time. So financial year 2023, they're as low as $203,000, and then they're expected to be up around at $408,000 in this financial year, which we'll get into a little bit more with the capital program, because it obviously influences those expenses.
Yeah, I guess, to me, this is just, we've got to split these two out, because we can't be setting, it's a competitive business, cremations. Obviously, it's not a competitive business, cemeteries particularly, because we're probably undercharging, and therefore there's no profit in it. So I think what we've got to understand the numbers. So we figure out, but at the moment we seem to be putting cremation fees up to cover people getting buried in our cemetery. So, I think we need to have a really good understanding of exactly which part of these is where, and where the losses are and where the profits are, and then we can make good decisions. Because quite frankly, I'm quite happy to get out of the cremation business if it's costing our ratepayers money. There's no reason to be there if that's going to be a service that's cheaper to drive them to Hamilton and cremate them there. Then there's no reason for us to be in that business at all. But if it's actually generating an income, then potentially we do want to be involved in that. In that, but let's get those numbers so we know what we're actually talking about. Councillor Crowther.
When I look at some of these numbers, they're quite concerning to me. That with the decrease in financing costs, we're heading from about a sixth to heading towards a fifth of the expenditure being for financing costs, which seems incredibly problematic. And then we've got what I guess I'm not quite understanding internal allocations, because we've already got about a third of the expenditure sort of trending downwards for employee admin expenses. So is that just like an overheads for the whole organisation that's attributed to this activity?
Hi, so yes, internal allocations are allocated rather than kind of service level payments, and that includes to the cemetery. I'm trying to recall, but I think in that financial year 24, we reviewed the way in which we allocated and reduced down some of the drivers as they kind of flowed through to the cemetery, probably in places like, that not everyone has a laptop, that sort of thing. But otherwise, that will just be reflective of those general allocation costs and that proportion. The second thing is the finance expenses will cover both the purchase of land associated with, the growing cemetery area, so it's covering the costs of that, any investments that have happened in the area and including the new cremator, but also in those years where there was a deficit, that will be held as an interest on overdraft. So again, those are kind of things that we can look at as part of that process and say, well, was that an over allocation, and therefore do we write off some of that debt? So some of those things are flexible, but the cost of land, the cost of that Pies Par area is reflected in the finance costs as well. But we can provide more breakdown. We are sort of currently trying to break that information out for you.
I guess my comment would be that I kind of worry about for something like this, which has a strong, like the whole thing is public good, and there is a wider benefit to our society from doing this, and we are aiming for 100%, and then we actually load in a whole lot of allocations in there, and unless that is incredibly robust, and I would like to see that evidence to make sure, because I think we run the risk of, would be better doing a marginal overheads allocation here than, because we kind of have much bigger issues, I think, in our finances in terms of allocation of costs and getting back money, for growth and things like that. And this to me is just like, it's just loading it up on here, and I'm not convinced that would be appropriate. The other one, I do worry about, I'd like to, at some point, sort of get an understanding of what the gas expenses are for the crematorium, because based on what futures prices are and everything, that's a really, really significant cost increase that will be, and I don't know what the plan was around the cremator in terms of efficiency gains and things, but, all that seems incredibly relevant here to keeping the costs under control.
Hydrogen, that's the alternative, so.
Yeah,
Councillor Taylor.
So the new cremator is actually able to be swapped over to hydrogen at the point that it would make sense to.
Sorry, my question is for Catherine. So you talked about the value of the land out there. So how do we value that? Is that kiwi fruit land rate, or is that...
No, the debt will have been when we purchased the land, and how that debt is being, interest is being charged and retired. So it would have been 4 or 5 years ago, I think, my recollection, that we purchased some properties out there. Yep.
Just to answer your question there, Councillor Crowther, so our gas expenses have, been as low as sort of $30,000 per year, and then increased up to around 90 to 100. So, yeah, they have increased substantially.
Right, yep.
So the capital program obviously adds to the conversation around self-funding and paying back debt, etc. So within the capital program, there's obviously ongoing asset renewals that we need to do around the buildings and key parts of the cemetery, the new crematorium that's to be built for the new cremator, but there's also just some key infrastructure. So on the picture in front of you, so the yellow square is inside the active part of the reserve at the moment. There's about 630 plots left in that area. So part of the capital is to put in new beams. So we put in the concrete rows to put the headstones and everything on, so that would just be able to happen within that yellow square space. The rectangle area is, if you remember when we were visiting, there's the bare land that's south of the cemetery. So in order to cater for the additional burials that we are expecting to come, we would need to start doing earthworks in there within the next couple of years, ready to have burial space available from 2030 to 31. So it's earthworks to shape the land into an appropriate usable space, a loop road to provide access in and through, and accessibility paths and all those things that need to happen to make the cemetery function, and then to be able to add beams on as we need them throughout the years. So the capital program at the moment includes a lot more than that, but what we've done is look at what we would do to take it back to the bare minimum, which would be the asset renewals. Actually, I'll go to the next slide. So bare minimum would be renewals, the crematorium, getting that piece of land ready that I've just talked about, and minimal chapel improvements to last 25 years because it is below the threshold for seismic in the current chapel. At the moment, and that graph is showing, so the green is showing what the deficit looks like on the current LTP capital program, but we are saying that potentially we could take 40% out of the capital program by removing the new chapel, staff amenities, consolidating there's a plan at the moment to consolidate and provide new maintenance and workshops and some security improvements. So by removing those things out, we reduce the ongoing debt, but it doesn't remove it altogether, shown by the red in the graph about where the deficit would get to by reducing the capital program.
Yeah, I guess again we've got to look at the chapel and say, well, for example, what does that actually, does it cover its face? And it probably doesn't. And so therefore, why are we investing in something that, is that a must-have for our community, that there's a chapel at the burial ground? So I think, we've got to look at these things from a more a business lens to say, firstly, what is the costs and does it wash its face? And secondly, if it doesn't wash its face, what is the community benefit, and is that actually required, or can we allow the other 100 churches around the city to do the job of that? So those are the decisions that we need to have, but we need that information, I think, to be able to make these decisions. Rather than just ad hoc, well, we can remove this and we can do this and that sort of thing. And if we're going to put capital program into making new burial plots, well, the cost will be associated in that. And if it's cheaper to go to Western Bay, then they can go and make a choice. That becomes a choice as to where they ultimately get buried. So. Yeah, Councillor Baker.
This is such an interesting conversation. Just culturally thinking about death as a business is just a bit foreign. So sorry if I'm making faces. It's not judging what any of you guys are saying. It's just wrapping my head around the crux of the kōrero. But following that similar line of thinking, and I'm probably, first question is, so we're legally required to provide cemetery services. What's the what's our terms that we've been using? What's the minimum viable outcome? I don't want to use the word product here, but that we need to fulfill. And because my thinking is beyond 2050, which is when you said this is when that yellow lot and then the bigger lot A will be full. Do we have to actually provide land for people to lie in? Is that what the law actually says at this point in time? Is it okay? Yeah, it's interesting. So that's more of a national conversation. Damn, just back home, we're starting to, it's a real slow ship that's turning, because land is so valuable now, let alone buildable, productive land back home, that we're moving away from putting our people in the ground to cremating and then having plaque walls, because the value is actually more on life practically than it is. There are other ways to remember, but obviously if we're required to provide holes, then that's what we're required to do. But then, yeah, brings up the question about chapels and stuff, which I think are good discussions to have.
And then, so I guess just to continue the conversation about the revenue and finance policy, as we've touched on, the average that other councils are providing for is 45% rates funded. And I guess just to start the discussion, if there was an appetite to consider a review of the policy, just as an example, if we were to say that within the revenue and finance policy we would look to have 25% rates funded it's about $500,000 to $600,000 of rates funding, which equates to about 0.2% increase in overall rates. So that was just to give an example of what it would look like if we wanted to bring rates funding into the revenue and finance policy.
Yeah, I don't see an issue with it at the moment. But we need to understand those numbers, and I think to Councillor Crowther's point of view, like maybe there's some big chunks in there around allocations and stuff that potentially that should be out or should be rates funded, etc. But let's have those discussions. I think we need to see again that much better information before we can really give a very good guide as to which direction we're going to go. Councillor Crowther.
Yeah, I think people around the table probably recall I voted against the user fees significantly because of some of the changes. One of them was the non-resident fee on the grounds that we are aiming for a user pays, but we're charging a non-resident fee and we're kind of profiteering from that, in my view. I just can't see any logic. If it's rates subsidised, then people in Western Bay or wherever, they need to pay more, potentially. But if it's not rate subsidised, to me it's kind of crazy. And then, is this going to be tit for tat where Western Bay Council decides, right, we're going to charge a non-residence fee because all these people are coming across our border, getting buried in our area. We don't like that. I mean, to me, it's a horrible way to go about something which is a huge issue for people in their lives. And with the issues around, with Death Without Debt and other campaigns, and some of the efforts that people go to for paupers' funerals, really we're profiteering from that, in my view, as well, because we're saying we claim that money first from wins, and yet it's the funeral directors who do all the work. So I'd really like to have a complete reassessment of those fees and of the self-backfill option. I think education is a far better way to do it, and to actually sit down with the families beforehand and talk to them about the reality of compacting and give some choices and look. And actually, I personally would like to see a time and motion study. I just think it's absolutely ridiculous, having worked there in the past one summer, that there's just no way in the world that is $293 worth of work. I'd love to see how that is assessed. And in terms of the additional charge for burial on a Saturday or after 4 on Monday to Friday, Western Bay has an after 5 p.m. fee of nearly half what ours is. Other councils either don't have such a fee or have much lower. And in terms of Saturdays, it's the most popular day. Like, practically, it's the day where funeral directors and families want more burials and more cremations than any other day. So if we're structuring it that way, why don't we actually just tell staff we'd like Saturday to be one of the days that you're scheduled for work? And to me, putting money at and especially during a cost of living crisis where you actually affecting people, and this leaves debt that's really significant in people's lives. And I really, you obviously hear what I'm saying. I just do not support any of those charges. I don't think they should be there. I think if we're going to do it, we need to be far more evidence-based and also talk it through with the funeral directors in here with us in the council chamber.
Right, thank you. I think we're still got more to do, have we?
I'll rush through quickly. So basically, there hasn't been any specific consultation on cemeteries other than user fees and charges. I think we've highlighted some of the risks if we keep going how we are around what that might mean for families in our community. And it's obviously dependent on factors outside of our control to a certain extent around the number of deaths and competition and all those types of things. So there are obviously opportunities to improve, and it's whether we're comfortable with where the fees are at the moment, but also broader than that. There's some bigger conversations that we think need to be had, whether it's down the track or what that looks like. But other councils are starting to have that limited tenure conversation, so how long you buy a plot for. Auckland and Wellington have started the charge on that, and that limited tenure is contemplated under the Act. some legal advice has got to that stage. So we do think that that's something that is worth exploring, but it's obviously quite a big conversation with the community. But if limited tenure is a thing, it drastically reduces the amount of extra land that we need to keep providing. And then there's also a conversation potentially to be had with Western Bay. So they have got significant capacity in their cemeteries at the moment. So, you know, how do we work together to make that work? But again, that's a conversation that we think is probably needed to have with the community, because people do like to be buried in the places that they affiliate to. And then obviously the RNF policy. So we don't know. I think we've covered all that sort of thing. But I guess what we would be keen to get some sort of thought on and guidance is if there is, I guess, appetite to do some more work around limited tenure. What would a strategy look like? What does our community actually want from our cemeteries, and how to be part of what we deliver there? What does the revenue and finance policy look like? But if we wanted to explore that type of conversation and detail, it would really need to be alongside long-term plan now. Or do we just want to go straight into actually how do we get the information that you've been asking for that specifically shows the cost of cremations versus burials, and just look at how we do our fees and charges and just keep going on that track?
Yeah, I think we need that, but we need, we're obviously going to need options, because it seems clear to me that burials are going to now become almost unaffordable, from if we actually are funding it to the degree that we need to, which therefore we need to look at other options like limited tenure, so that people can still afford to actually make the choices. So I'm open to options, but we need this this better information. And ironic that you say and I agree around the Bay wide or sub-region wide, because ironic you say people want to get buried in Tauranga and our cemeteries in Western Bay anyway, so
Sorry. I also think that I really want to make sure we have a proper conversation with private companies. I don't like seeing the word competition, because I think if private companies are able to provide the service to the people of Tauranga, then that's great. And I would like to be working alongside them and not working with them feeling that they're competition. The other thing I think, and this just goes, I think, with the Mayor's comment, when we're looking at the yellow space and the cost of the red space for burial grounds, so I would also like to make sure that we are recognising the risks, that we could spend X amount of millions on having that available, but if we are 100% charging back for it, what's our risk if we don't have the number of people taking up those plots, and how are we going to pay for that? So it's also we just need to understand. And when you look at the costs of that, how many years, so once it's full, and like we've got in the avenues, and the cost of that maintenance is now coming on to Pies Pa people, how long do you cost out the fact that you've got a full burial ground that you need to pay, the people that are buried there have had to pay for? So you don't get to the situation where you've got a cemetery in the avenues that is being funded elsewhere.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we need to do, is go and explore all of that and have a look at the city-wide strategy. Yeah.
Supportive of one. Question, are people or families allowed to be buried on top of one another? Yes. You can? Oh, sweet.
All right.
Yeah, we do too. Interestingly, there are some in Australia that do more than 2, so up to 4, but that's just a whole other conversation. So there's another workshop in October. If I'm hearing right, if we bring back some more detail around that cost split between cremations and burials and some of that other information that you're looking for, and then so it's a regroup conversation about whether we do something in this financial year, or whether it becomes a long-term plan conversation.
And when will you have the conversation with the private suppliers? Is that going to be, can that just come back, those conversations that have been had, please?
We'll try to fit as much as we can in between now and October, yeah.
I understand from them that they're keen to chat to Tauranga City Council, so I think it's a request from both sides.
I think, we need to understand the numbers before we can make any, before we have really meaningful conversations, because we can't, at the moment, we don't know. We're charging $976 for a cremation, but we have no idea whether that's good, bad, indifferent. Is it just because it costs? Yeah. So it's really hard to have those conversations with. I think the funeral directors have made it very clear they want to talk to us, but we need to be in a better place before we can actually have a meaningful conversation with them.
Is there an explanation for why the Lagoima information that went out to the public, or to the funeral directors anyway, why that has different financial information to what you presented today? In terms of operating revenue, operating expenditure, various expenses, it's got different numbers.
I can't even remember what the Lagoima is, sorry, I need to look at it.
It was around 6 years worth of revenue and expenditure for that activity area. So it was under the category 84 cemeteries, as in 84 in the council's coding number. So I just wondered, does that include something other than what you presented today?
I'd have to have a look at what was in the Lagoima, sorry.
Okay, so hopefully, I think we just need that information, but agree around the direction. I think this is something we actually can't wait to long-term plan. I think it has to go out with our user fees review, because, we've got to make a change as quickly as we can. Boat ramps, we've gone through this.
Mater that's been bought, that capacity is significantly greater, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's almost double of what we're doing at present.
It can do double the volume, and it's also able to take larger size caskets, which at the moment go to Auckland.
Yeah. And so Auckland's the only other place that provides that. Okay, yeah. Thank you.
Sorry. So the previous boat ramp fees is based on the 3 main boat ramps, and just for the purposes of this conversation, for FY26, it's a cost of $89,000 to maintain and renew, but that does fluctuate each year. It's been up to about $180 in previous years. But the full costs are $640 when you add in the depreciation, interest and allocations. But as far as actual R&M goes for this year, for the example, is $89,000. There's about $10 million through the LTP for upgrades and potentially additional boat ramps at Marine Park, that we're just understanding the demand and constraints on that at the moment. The user fees and charges that were brought in through the long-term plan had a projected revenue of $313,000 a year based on the $20 a day, $200 a year pass. In the 2 months that we actually were running it, we got in $126,000 GST inclusive, that was then paid back. And then there's just some benchmarking there against other councils, but in the name of 7 minutes, I'll keep going. So we got quite a lot of submissions through the long-term plan with about a 50-50 split for and against. Received a petition based on price and concern around accessibility to the ocean, and feedback around the customary fishing rights. and why the annual pass was only for residents. So in the report that was brought back to the new council in 24, it was contemplating how we might be able to address some of those concerns, such as extending the annual pass to non-residents, having exempt boat trailers that are used for customary fishing rights and traditional practices, and amending the pass. One of the key parts of feedback we got were people that have multiple trailers, so rather than paying them the same amount for every trailer, they'd pay the full amount for the first one, and then the second trailer charged at a separate amount, and then no additional for the third or more. And that slide just summarises the things. But to do the charging, so essentially it's by proxy through the parking fee. We looked into having barriers and things there, and just the nature of having that and the way that people are using our spaces, having barrier arms just was more difficult than putting in place a charge to park in the spaces. So to put the 4 machines back in, and so the machines, installation and signage and all those things is circa $95,000. Administratively, it is reasonably expensive to do. On saying that, with the work that Reece has been doing around permit holders, etc., in the city centre, there's now a new way of doing things, so we think we could probably do it cheaper. But for the 2 months that we did it last year, it was about $30,000 in staff time to set up and do all the checks and everything that we needed to do. And then there's a $10,000 annual machines subscription for all, that's a total for the 4 machines. So depending on where we land on how we do the administration side of things, it would be about $30,000 to $50,000 to have it operating each year.
So I'm just interested, like, you know, you've got machines, but there's not one boat ramp I've ever been to that I've used a machine. There's actually, the boat ramps I've been to, they don't even have machines. It's all done online.
Yep, so you can do it on app as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but so why do we need a machine? Like,
Is Reece here?
I'm just...
You don't. You can do it without a machine if you like. The first time around a couple of years ago, when it was reviewed, there was a call for people wanting to be able to put cash in a machine to access the boat ramps. So those 4 machines were cash machines, hence they're slightly more expensive than the PayWave ones, and that was the main driver behind those machines being there. In my experience, you would be able to use apps, because that's been done in other marinas in the past before where it's app only. You just have to deal with that. You'll get those inquiries around coins for a little while before people get used to the new sort of system.
Okay. No, that's fine. It seems like if you're putting in a new, we've had machines smashed, why put them out there and then just, there's an ongoing cost. So, you just start a new system with app only, and that's what they do in Coromandel, that's what they do down in Picton, that's what they do, Taupo, everywhere I've used them, there's not a machine there, so, takes out a huge amount of cost as well, which is good. Yeah, Councillor Correct.
With the CAPEX that's proposed to extend the Marine Park boat ramp, when you go to Google Maps, and I'm not sure the date on that, the imagery, there's no additional space, or seemingly not much space available to accommodate growth. So if the additional ramps that accommodate growth, where are the boats and trailers going to park? Because the University of Waikato is taking a big chunk of that. I know there's a few metres between the current casual parking, part of that green space is used at the peak time to accommodate parking. So what's the proposal in terms of additional space to park boat cars and trailers?
So the high-level development plan, concept plan that we have down there does show, I think we can achieve up to 4 additional boat ramps and accommodate parking alongside the Marine Research Centre. It's actually something that I think there's probably worth a further discussion around how we can see that space being managed as a whole. Yeah.
When I looked at the picture, I thought it'd be great if you could speak to the university and ask if their project can just be shifted a bit further north to accommodate that car parking rather than having to drive around to the other side of the research centre. So that's my initial thought.
All right. Yeah, Councillor Crowther.
Yeah, on that one, I guess one of the things that comes strongly from the community is that people are parked all around the place down there anyway when it's busy on a weekend. So how do you actually, you know, it's just that whole thing of we're paying to maintain a particular area where the charges are presumably assessed, and then you sort of say, well, that's how we analyse the cost for it, but then the benefits go across all around the place, and you then extend that to parking in general, and you've got all up in the avenues now, you've got people all over berms and everything, wearing out, you know, the grass, which changes maintenance requirements, etc., which falls on private people. You know, to me, we've got a real complexity here by what are we trying to achieve? Is it just the maintenance of the ramps, or is it, because if it's actually the parking area, then I think Councillor Kurak's point is quite valid if you broaden it to that whole area where people are parking where they shouldn't be, in both directions. Some people are parking where it's set up for trailers, and they're just people freedom camping there at times.
I think, yeah, just from a, direction, I think we need to look at, and this is across all user fees and charges, we need to look at differences between our ratepayers and other people, I think, or sorry, not our residents and ratepayers, our people. I think if you live in Tauranga and you're contributing to these things through through your rates, then therefore you should be looked after more around it. So if we are going to go down this route, I think we should have two different fees, whether you live here or whether you don't. And I think annual passes absolutely should be available to out-of-towners as well, but they pay a higher cost for that. It's just from an admin perspective. It's the same as if I go and launch my boat in Coromandel, I pay more from being a non-ratepayer, and I think it's a pretty simple system though. You buy your annual pass and you can go and use all the ramps as you like. So it's a pretty simple project. So yeah, Councillor Morris.
Yeah, thank you. Couple of points for this table on it. If we were looking at equity across different users and we applied the 3.9% OPEX that we're doing in terms of sports fields use, would be cents in the dollar in terms of the cost to launch. So I can understand why boating communities feeling picked on in that regard. The second thing is I'm not sure why, and again this is for this table, I'm not sure why we're making a treaty issue in terms of access to the water there. I think that can be covered very easily by saying community organisations, not-for-profits can have a discount or zero consideration in terms of use of those ramps, because that would cover people, like sailing trusts, people who are working with getting access for people with disabilities, all manner of community organisations that need to use the boat ramp. Even Coast Guard, I know they've got the big boat at the marina, but even Coast Guard in terms of smaller operations, that covers the whole length of it. And so again, for this table, we've had discussions around own goals and having a smart political lens on our decisions. So I think actually, if things were couched in that way, then there's not a problem. But when you single out mana whenua and say, okay, there's just going to be remission for them for cultural purposes, then we're getting into a wider conversation in New Zealand that we just don't need to have.
Right. Yeah. And I think again, to your point, just around the equity, I think it's a good one. I think you just got to look at the facilities as they are, and so the actual wharves and that sort of thing, that should be 100% covered by the boaties because they're the only ones that use that. Whereas you say, well, is the park and the maintenance to do for park, is that sort of a shared thing because there's other people that use it? So I think it's, again, if we have that information, we can have a bit more breakdown, we can make a better decision, around those things. But yeah, Councillor correct.
Thank you, Mahe. I think Steve's point was more around comparing to other activities and say an art gallery user, other than those that walk into the art gallery, there's no benefit to others apart from those direct users. And so I think Steve's point is a parity around that, because those are the arguments put through that boat ramp issue during the election campaign, or a library book. There's no other beneficiary from someone who wants to borrow for their recreational, an adult wanting to borrow books. There's no benefit outside that person hiring that book. So I think that's where we need to look at around parity and percentage of the cost of activity. Like someone walk into the art gallery, the cost per ratepayer would be massive compared to boat ramp. So I think that stuff, and Christine sort of indicated at the start of this meeting, some of those principles and fundamentals need to be considered about how we're going to approach this. I know in the agenda item, we've got some of those issues coming up. And so we need to take into account around that parity of different activities versus the cost per user and the cost per ratepayer. These are big, hard issues that we need to try and understand and come to a point where you're not deterring too many uses by having a similar ratio of cost to the user rather than the ratepayer. It's quite complex.
Yeah, it is. No, I think that's just, I guess, my direction around trying to. I'd love to see a way that we can differentiate our people to the people that aren't our people, so that come to visit us. And that would be across the board. It would be, we do it at the hot pools already. It would be great to have a system where it's easy that that it can recognise that I'm a resident here or I'm not, and or a resident or a ratepayer. So.
Hamilton Gardens is a perfect example. The locals get it free and all the visitors have to pay, and it seems to be working well.
But it's just interesting how, I don't know how they actually administer that. How do you prove that you live here? But it would be great to have a system to be able to prove that. And I
So I think in Hamilton Gardens that you actually register as a Hamilton ratepayer. So when you go to pay your ticket, you automatically get it free, rather than going as a Tauranga person and having to pay. Well, they took about 3 years to get the concept through, and they thought it would actually decrease the number of people coming, but it actually didn't. So, and it was, and it's seen by the residents as a really great thing.
Yeah.
Just on the cost and the percentage that's paid, we just have to make sure we are charging for the land, as we do at the crematorium. We need to make sure that that's all part of the costing, and we need to make sure we're bringing in the cost of, if that was just parking for the normal person in the centre of Tauranga, that's a comparison that we need to bring in as well.
Right. Is there anything else? Done? Excellent. Might pass back to Councillor Baker then to give us a finish.
Thank you guys for your hard work. Good questions, good discussions, and good direction, I think. So, kia tāre watunga ki te kōrero ki te rangi, ko ia tēnei te whakawātea ki nei tūturu whakamaua kia tīna haumie hui e tae ki e.
This workshop is closed at 12:09.